my dear readers, listeners, and of course, old friends. The juxtaposition of jurisprudence in the aftermath of war offers a fertile ground for the exploration of justice, morality, and the often tenuous grasp of civilization upon the precipice of chaos. Nowhere is this more starkly illustrated than in the comparative analysis of war crimes tribunals on Cardassia and Romulus, particularly as they pertain to the heinous and devastating practice of orbital bombardment. The meticulous examination of specific cases, the legal arguments presented therein, and the ethical precedents established by these tribunals illuminate the variegated landscape of accountability and moral reasoning in the aftermath of interstellar conflict. The very nature of orbital bombardment, a detached, impersonal method of inflicting mass destruction from the cold vacuum of space, renders it a particularly abhorrent strategy of war. It embodies a level of clinical detachment that divorces the perpetrator from the immediate carnage wrought upon the civilian population below. As such, the ethical and legal scrutiny of such actions becomes paramount in any post-war tribunal seeking to re-establish the shattered norms of decency and humanity. Cardassian Tribunal: a struggle for redemption amidst guilt. On Cardassia, the tribunals post-Dominion War were driven not merely by a quest for justice, but by an almost desperate need for redemption. Cardassia, under the oppressive yoke of the Dominion, had engaged in acts that left indelible scars upon its conscience and reputation. Among these acts, the orbital bombardment of Lacarian City stands as a chilling testament to the extent of their moral dissent. The legal proceedings regarding the Lacarian City bombardment were exhaustive. The Cardassian tribunal was notably public, transparent, and imbued with a sense of penitence. The tribunal sought to confront the grim reality of the actions taken by its military, dissecting each decision with a meticulousness that bordered on the masochistic. Key military figures were brought to trial not merely as a matter of legal obligation, but as a public catharsis, a way to lay bare the moral failings of the past regime. Central to the tribunal's proceedings was the testimony of Gul Madrid, the architect of the Lacarian strategy. The prosecution presented an unequivocal case. The bombardment, executed under the pretext of military necessity, was a flagrant violation of interstellar conventions. The tribunal underscored the indiscriminate nature of the attack, emphasizing the disproportionate impact on civilian life and infrastructure. In a poignant moment, holographic reconstructions of the devastation were displayed, forcing the court, and by extension the Cardassian public, to confront the brutal reality of the bombardment. The defense's argument hinged on the doctrine of military necessity, positing that the bombardment was a strategic imperative designed to hasten the end of hostilities and, paradoxically, save lives in the long run. This rationale, however, was systematically dismantled by the prosecution, which presented evidence that the decision was as much about retribution and demonstrating power as it was about military strategy. In its final judgment, the tribunal condemned the bombardment as a war crime, sentencing those responsible to severe penalties. The ruling was significant not only for its legal ramifications, but for the ethical precedent it set. The tribunal asserted that the exigencies of war could not justify the wholesale slaughter of innocents, establishing a clear moral boundary that even in the direst of conflicts, there are lines that must not be crossed. In stark contrast, the Romulan post-war tribunals approached the issue of orbital bombardment with a clinical detachment that bordered on the Machiavellian. The Romulan Star Empire, ever pragmatic and shrouded in secrecy, conducted its tribunals with an eye towards preserving its strategic interests and maintaining the facade of imperial infallibility. The case of the bombardment of the Khitomer colony provides a compelling study of this approach. The tribunal, conducted within the austere halls of the Tal Shiar's judicial division, was a closed affair, shielded from public scrutiny. The primary defendant, Commander Terrell, was a figure of considerable repute, his military acumen lauded within the Empire. The charges against him, the indiscriminate bombardment of a civilian-populated colony, were grave, yet the proceedings were marked by a conspicuous lack of moral outrage. The prosecution's case was robust in its presentation of facts, detailing the sequence of events leading to the bombardment. However, the argument was framed within a context that implicitly acknowledged the harsh realities of Romulan realpolitik. The bombardment, it was argued, was a necessary action in the face of a potentially destabilizing insurgency that threatened the security of the Empire. The strategic imperative of maintaining order and demonstrating the might of the Romulan military was presented as a justification for the extreme measures taken. The defense's argument was less about exonerating Commander Terrell and more about contextualizing his actions within the broader framework of Imperial strategy. It was suggested that the bombardment, while regrettable, was an unfortunate necessity in the maintenance of Imperial stability. The defense emphasized the doctrine of absolute loyalty to the state, framing Terrell's actions as those of a dutiful servant executing the will of the Empire. In its final judgment, the Romulan Tribunal issued a verdict that was predictably ambivalent. Commander Terrell was found guilty of overstepping his mandate but was sentenced to a nominal penalty, reflecting a tacit endorsement of his actions by the state. The ruling underscored a chilling ethical calculus. The preservation of state security and imperial hegemony took precedence over the sanctity of civilian life. This judgment set a precedent that in the Romulan Star Empire, the ends could indeed justify the means, provided those ends served the interests of the state. The stark contrast between the Cardassian and Romulan tribunals reveals a profound divergence in ethical reasoning and accountability. On Cardassia, the tribunal's proceedings were driven by a profound sense of guilt and a desire for moral redemption. The public nature of the trials, the thoroughness of the investigations, and the severity of the sentences all pointed to a society grappling with its conscience and striving to rebuild its moral foundations. In contrast, the Romulan approach was characterized by a cold, pragmatic calculation. The tribunals were less about justice and more about reinforcing the imperatives of state security and control. The clandestine nature of the proceedings, the contextual justification of actions taken, and the leniency of the sentences all reflected a society where the machinery of state power operated with ruthless efficiency, often at the expense of moral considerations. Yet beneath these divergences lies a converging reality. Both tribunals, in their own ways, reflect the complexities and contradictions inherent in the pursuit of justice in the aftermath of war. The Cardassian tribunal, for all its moral fervor, was still a product of a society seeking to rebuild and redefine itself. The Romulan tribunal, for all its cold pragmatism, was a reflection of a society steadfast in its adherence to the imperatives of power and control. The ethical precedents set by these tribunals offer valuable lessons for the broader interstellar community. They underscore the need for clear, unequivocal standards in the conduct of war, particularly in the use of technologies that can inflict mass destruction from a distance. They highlight the importance of transparency, accountability, and moral courage in the pursuit of justice. And they remind us that even in the darkest of times, the quest for a just and humane society remains a noble and necessary endeavor. The comparative analysis of the Cardassian and Romulan tribunals reveals a profound tapestry of moral reasoning and ethical judgment. It challenges us to reflect on our own standards of justice and accountability, and to strive for a world where the horrors of war are met not with impunity, but with a steadfast commitment to the principles of humanity and decency. It is a reminder that in the face of unspeakable atrocity, the true measure of a society lies not in its capacity for vengeance, but in its unwavering dedication to the cause of justice.